June 8, 2001. It's early in the evening, and a storm system named Allison is swamping Houston with heavy rain, hour after hour.
It was just like someone was just pouring a bucket of water down on Houston. These raindrops were just the biggest, fattest raindrops I'd ever seen.
Sidewalks quickly turned to streams, roads to rivers, and the city's drains begin to overflow.
The water was it was coming from everywhere at one point, coming across the street, down the street, and we were just trapped.
When you see an 18-wheeler in a parking lot completely submerged except for the very top of the box, you know the water's pretty deep.
Over 2 feet of rain is dumped on Houston over the next 24 hours. Hundreds of people are stranded, trapped in their cars, and forced from their homes.
I want babies in this boat now!
Houston is about to burst.
The scale of the disaster, the number of people who needed help, was completely overwhelming.
From the Weather Channel, this is Atmospheres. Real people, real weather. With your host, meteorologist Jim Cantore.
Hello, I'm Jim Cantore, and welcome to this special edition of Atmospheres, shot right here in Houston, Texas. Many people think that hurricanes and tornadoes are the only truly dangerous storms, but weaker weather systems can cause just as much destruction. In June 2001, a tropical storm named Allison made landfall in Texas, with winds that reached 45 miles per hour. Within 12 hours, the system weakened, and it appeared the danger was over. But as the system drifted back over Houston, it let loose up to 3 feet of rain, causing severe flooding. Houston found itself in the middle of a full-scale disaster. And as you're going to see, this little storm system would become the most expensive tropical storm in U.S. history.
Tuesday, June 5th. Tropical Storm Allison makes landfall near Galveston, Texas. After forming off the coast 7 hours earlier, it packs winds of 45 miles per hour and drops up to 8 inches of rain. Within a day, the storm is downgraded to a tropical depression and appears to be leaving the area. But the remnants of Allison surprise residents.
People thought the storm had weakened and gone north and wasn't coming back. It turned back to the south and moved back over Houston.
When Allison returns that Friday, Houston, known as the Bayou City, is unprepared. Houston is the country's 4th largest city, with 2 million downtown residents and 4.5 million in the metropolitan region. The sprawling city is extremely flat, with an elevation only slightly above sea level. Moisture must be absorbed by an intricate system of bayous and man-made canals. The drains are already at capacity when Allison comes back for a second round.
The National Weather Service here in Houston began to issue flood watches, and these were of a very serious nature. They knew that if this thing came back and dumped a lot of rain, it was going to be dumping on saturated ground, and we could flood very quickly.
Few people are prepared, however, for the massive amount of rain that begins to fall around 5 p.m.
A cluster of intense thunderstorms formed and stayed stationary right over a specific portion of the city overnight.
We have a very good system of bayous and creeks, but it can be overwhelmed with rainfall rates above 3 inches an hour, and that's what we were getting.
Three miles north of downtown, about 1 block from White Oak Bayou, 21-year-old Chad Guerin is relaxing at home. He's joined early in the evening by Jeremy Harmon and Mark McDavid, 2 friends he met at Texas A&M University.
It was raining pretty decently when I drove over there, enough to where I had to drive slow, but there was no floodwaters anywhere.
Around 10 p.m., the rain is getting worse.
It just unleashed and was pouring. It didn't stop all night. It just kept pouring and pouring.
Even so, the three friends have tickets to see a local concert that's just 10 minutes away. They decide to go ahead with their plans.
I guess we figured the least that could happen is we'd maybe stall out. That's about, the extent of what we thought could go wrong that night.
So we got in his truck and proceeded to try to cross the water. We got about halfway through. It came up to about the bottom of his doors, and his truck stalled.
The three young men realize they've made a serious mistake. Water from the bayou gushes inside the truck. Within seconds, the vehicle begins to float away.
The current started to sweep the car basically right out from under us, and we were just starting to drift over the embankment. And that's when we decided that we all needed to jump out of the car and hopefully get to safety.
The three friends manage to squeeze their way through the roll-down windows, but their ordeal is far from over. Chad, Jeremy, and Mark find themselves in debris-filled water that's nearly 40 feet deep in some places. The current is so powerful that it sweeps them into nearby trees.
I was scared. I was definitely scared. I'd never been in a situation like that in my entire life, and I think it was the first time that I ever had to sit there and, take a second and make my peace that, I might not get out of that water.
Not all of Houston is underwater. In a nearby neighborhood, 21-year-old Amanda Sudam is kissing her fiancé, Christopher Rizzo, goodnight. He's headed to his parents' house 2 miles away. The couple's wedding is scheduled for the next day, and Amanda is feeling superstitious.
In my opinion, and I've heard from others, it's bad luck to be with your fiancé after the rehearsal dinner.
The two met at a George Strait concert in April 1999. On New Year's Eve 2000, Chris proposed as the clock struck midnight. They had spent more than a year planning every little detail of their wedding. But they hadn't prepared for several feet of rain.
I know it wouldn't flood right then, but eventually it would. I had considered the wedding at this point that it could possibly not take place.
By now, it's around 11 p.m., and Chad Guerin, Mark McDavid, and Jeremy Harmon are fighting for their lives. They cling to the trees, screaming for help.
There were some people on the other side of the water. They started yelling to us, but with the rain coming down and with the currents, we couldn't really hear what they were saying. So we were yelling back for them to call help.
Police officers C.R. Bean and Michael Lumpkin are less than a mile away when they get the alarm.
Call went out over the radio that there were people in the White Oak Bayou who were screaming for help, possibly drowning.
The roads are so flooded that it takes the officers almost a half hour to cover 6 blocks. When they finally arrive, they are shocked at what they see. What was a street is now a raging river.
The rain was coming down nonstop. It was cold. The wind was blowing hard, and you could see the current in the water, how fast it was moving.
When we initially got here, we couldn't see the kids in the trees, but we could hear them.
The officers figure out where the young men are and drag themselves through the water. The only object they can hold on to is some barbed wire that tops a nearby fence. They reach 23-year-old Jeremy first. Sergeant Bean throws a life jacket attached to a rope. After a few tries, Jeremy finally grabs it.
Once I had it on, I just jumped in the water and hoped for the best and kind of turned my back towards them and just tried to kick with them, and they just pulled me to shore.
The officers then spot Chad and Mark, who are clinging to the same tree. Chad insists that Mark be rescued next. A few minutes later, the lifeline is within Mark's reach.
All I could see was just Mark's head and the orange life preserver sitting out in the water, and it would just thunder and lightning and then go dark, and it was just raining, the sirens. It was all just kind of running together. It was just really surreal.
The officers pull Mark in. 2 of the 3 friends are safe now, but the downpour is getting worse. The rescue team struggles to reach Chad. who's been in the chilly water for almost 2 hours.
We were close to hypothermic. Just being in the water, and I myself, I had over 100 ant bites.
Finally, the officers reach him. But moments later, things go tragically wrong. Coming up next, officers struggle to save a young man's life.
One of the officers reached out and grabbed his hand, but when he did, it pulled the officer in the water.
All we could do is sit there and watch and, you know, just kind of to yell for Chad to hang on.
Now back to Atmospheres.
It's around 1 a.m. on Saturday, June 9th, 2001. Remnants of Tropical Storm Allison are stationary over Houston, pounding it with, at times, up to 5 inches of rain an hour. Floods of water are streaming over the already saturated ground and overflowing bayous. Mark McDavid and Jeremy Harmon have just been rescued by police after clinging to trees for almost 2 hours in the raging waters. But their friend, 21-year-old Chad Guerin, is still trapped.
All we could do is sit there and watch and, you know, just kind of to yell for Chad to hang on and, you know, do the best that he could.
The officers make their way to within reaching distance of Chad, but he starts to panic and the rescue goes wrong.
He started struggling. He said he said his foot was caught on something. One of the officers reached out and grabbed his hand, but when he did, it pulled the officer in the water, so I grabbed him and pulled him back, and when we did that, their hands separated.
The moment their hands are pulled apart, Chad goes under. He's at the mercy of the rushing current.
Jeremy and I just started yelling for him to keep fighting and keep swimming. And then he went under again, and then we didn't see him.
I saw Chad go underwater, and I saw them kind of all turn, kind of with their heads hung, kind of walking out of the water, just kind of shaking their heads. And I kind of knew at that point that it was over. I mean, my friend was gone.
By now, it's close to 2 a.m., and the flood is ravaging much of the city. Near downtown Houston, 36-year-old Demetrius Bradley arrives for his early morning shift at the Methodist Hospital. He heads toward the basement, unaware that it's rapidly filling with water.
The elevator popped open, and I jumped on it and pushed down, and it went down, and it hit water. And the water started filling up the elevator.
Demetrius is trapped between floors. He frantically looks for a way to escape, but there is none. He calls out for help. Then he begins to pray.
Lord, I told Lord, please, Lord, I know you didn't let me make it all the way here just to die in this elevator. I know you didn't. I know you got something planned special for me, and this not it.
Minutes later, hospital dispatcher Jesse Wilhite takes an urgent call. A man can be heard screaming in the elevator and is in danger of drowning.
A 4x6 box in the dark with water coming up on you, that's got to be horrible. So there was really no thinking about it after the initial shock or panic, and it was just move fast.
Jesse needs keys to get into the elevator, but they're kept in the basement.
I thought I could go down there and maybe just waist deep water, go in there and get the key for the elevator. There was no way. The water was like having a river jamming underneath your feet.
Inside the elevator, water is swirling up to Demetrius's chest. Time is running out.
Well, I was just thinking about if I was to pass, what would my son think? And what would my mother and my brother and them think?
Back on the hospital's main floor, Jesse finally finds a backup key. He races down the hall to the elevator door, where security officer George Ross is waiting.
Jesse took the key, stuck it in a little elevator hole, and he kept turning, and finally the doors kind of gave, it broke a little, and then we put our fingers in it and pulled it open.
The two men enter the shaft and carefully climb on top of the elevator car. Jesse rips open the hatch.
I'll never forget looking down in there and seeing his face, just in what little bit of light there was. There was panic. George got on one side, I got on the other, and we pulled the young man up.
When I got out, I felt very lucky, very lucky. So I got on the ground and I said my prayers.
It's now early Saturday morning, and Allison is setting new records for flood damage all over Houston.
Even though Allison was weak over land, it produced a lot of rain because it moved so slowly.
By that time, a lot of the creeks and the bayous were getting to their 100-year flood, and many of them getting up to their 500-year flood, and some even above that. The rainfall rates were incredible. Here at the station, we recorded almost 7 inches of rain falling in 1 hour's time.
Thousands of homes and businesses are awash, including the local CBS affiliate.
It was really strange to see my crew with brooms trying to sweep the water out of the television station. We actually had to shut down the station and go off the air for about an hour because we had water pouring into our generators.
16 miles north of downtown, Amanda Sudam is dry and safe, but she's worried that her wedding, scheduled for later that day, will be drowned out. At 4:30 a.m., she receives a call from her fiancé, Chris, whose parents' home is filling with water.
He said, you know, my house is flooding now, and we put everything up that we can. And I said, okay, and I said, what does it look like for the wedding? And he said, I truthfully don't know if I can make it.
You know, all this planning we've done, and, you know, the wedding's not going to go the way it's supposed to. You know, the house got flooded, you know, a bunch of stuff got ruined, and it's just not going to go the way Amanda wanted it to.
Several miles away, 15-year-old Monique Shepard is groaning with pain in her living room. She has gone into labor at the worst possible time.
It was thundering mostly, and I could hear the rain outside and everything. I wasn't really paying attention to it because of all the pain I was in.
Monique's mother, Janice Seiler, watches the water race toward her house, cutting off all roads to the hospital.
We were very scared, you know, because we didn't know how we were going to get her out of here, because by that time it was like 3 feet of water.
There's no way for an ambulance to reach Monique through the flooded street. Cars all over the city are submerged, stranding drivers and passengers. City rescue workers struggle to reach victims in the rising waters. They enlist the aid of the Coast Guard.
5 Foxtrot, Coast Guard Group Galveston, 2 and Alpha.
And we were starting to get calls at that point from police departments, fire departments, asking for our assistance because people were literally waking up to the magnitude of the storm.
At 5:30 a.m., there's a break in the weather, and the Coast Guard choppers lift off. Commander Matt Sisson and his crew are some of the first up.
We lifted off, and we decided just to go to the area of Houston that had been hardest hit. For no other reason than that we figured that's where the people needed the most help.
Rescue swimmer Chris Monville is also on board. It's now dawn. From the air, the city resembles a watery maze.
There was people on tops of cars where all you could see was the roof of the car, no windows. There was people kind of wading through the middle of the street, you know, waist deep, chest deep.
Water is now pouring inside 15-year-old Monique Shepard's house. Her labor contractions are growing stronger, and the pain is unbearable. Monique and her parents are terrified.
I was scared. I thought she was going to have to deliver a baby at home. I didn't know how to cut the umbilical cord. I was thinking about all those things. And then the germs that was in the water. I was scared.
Just ahead on Atmospheres, the daring rescue of a young mother.
Monique was laying on the couch in the fetal position, and the floor of the house was flooded. Things were floating around.
I was like, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. Mom was like, well, you have to go. You can't stay here.
Atmospheres continues with your host, meteorologist Jim Cantore.
Welcome back to Atmospheres. I'm Jim Cantore. On the morning of June 9th, 2001, Houston, Texas is literally underwater. The remnants of Tropical Storm Allison have unleashed record rainfall, and the Coast Guard has been called to the rescue. We pick up our story with 15-year-old Monique Shepard, who's about to give birth in her home.
It's 7:30 on Saturday morning, and Houston residents are waking up to the horrors left behind by remnants of Tropical Storm Allison. The rain has stopped for the moment, but floodwaters are 5 feet high in some areas. Thousands of people are homeless. Thousands more need to be rescued. Coast Guardsmen Matt Sisson and Chris Monville fly north to the Aldine area, one of the hardest hit, with up to 12 inches of rain.
We came upon a neighborhood where we saw the people on their rooftops all waving to us for help. So I hover taxied over there and looked down and saw a number of people all frantically waving for us and pointing at a house.
And somebody on the ground started signaling up to us that like they were pregnant or they were cradling a baby.
The chopper hovers, and Chris is lowered 120 feet to the murky floodwaters below.
You know, you had to walk through the water kind of cautiously because you don't know what was underneath the water at all.
He wades through waist-deep water into a home. There, he discovers 15-year-old Monique Shepard, who is in labor.
Monique was laying on the couch in the fetal position, and the floor of the house was flooded, and the carpet was, things were floating around.
We want to know about getting her out of the house and getting her to a hospital. And he said he could take her, but Monique said no, she didn't want to go.
I was like, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. Mom was like, well, you have to go. You can't stay here.
Monique is in immense pain. Her contractions only 5 minutes apart, but she's terrified of being hoisted into the helicopter.
And I was also scared because it was like this little string that was attached to the basket. I'm thinking, the string doesn't break.
And I held her hand and told her, it's going to be okay. It'll be about a 60-second ride, and you'll be up in the helicopter. And I said, I will be up there right after you.
Chris and Monique's father convince her to climb into the basket.
And as the basket was going up, I was clutching the side of the iron rail so hard, and I was just crying.
Once she's safely inside, the helicopter speeds to a nearby hospital. Most of greater and downtown Houston is underwater. But the area around the Foundry United Methodist Church is relatively dry. Amanda Sudam waits inside, still hoping to get married at 1 o'clock. The preacher is there, so is the organist and many of the guests, but others are missing, including the groom.
At this point, I wasn't giving up on the wedding. I was still going to try. I was going to show up to see if anybody was there.
Earlier that morning, Amanda's fiancé, Chris Rizzo, had called to tell her that he was being evacuated from his parents' flooded house. He was stranded 6 miles away from the church with no way to get there.
The phones end up going out not too long after we had that conversation. Nothing worked, cell phones or landline or anything.
I didn't know where Chris was or if he was going to even make it to the church at that point.
Just minutes before the wedding is scheduled to begin, Chris catches a break. A school bus is evacuating the neighborhood. He and his family hop on board.
Our church just happened to be on the way, and we told the driver to, pull over and let us out.
He arrives in the nick of time.
So I ended up showing up at church with the cat and the dog and, a couple garbage bags full of clothes.
It's not the exact wedding they had envisioned, but the ceremony is everything they hoped for.
Once the wedding took place, I felt a lot better, and it made me happy. And I realized we made the best out of what could be of the situation.
We both said it doesn't matter what I get married in, whether I'm soaking wet in shorts, because that's what I pulled up in, or we found a tux. But I was just happy it ended up going through.
It's probably one of the most joyous weddings I've performed all year, and I do maybe 2 or 3 almost every weekend. So it was an exciting wedding.
The scene around the rest of Houston is less hopeful. Bob Stolting, helicopter pilot for the local CBS affiliate, can't believe his eyes.
I've lived here in Texas since 1968. I've been flying around the city since 1982, and I have never seen anything to the magnitude that this was.
Probably the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is we have never seen water this high. Now, you look down there, and that water does not look like it's very treacherous, but I can guarantee you that underneath that surface, there is an unbelievable current.
As the day progressed, and every time we thought that we couldn't see anything worse, the further east we got and the further northeast we got, which is where they got the brunt of the storm, every time we'd hit another neighborhood, we'd see conditions worse than even we'd seen before.
All over town, people whose houses are now flooded are pouring into Red Cross shelters.
There we go. Thank you.
Thousands of pounds of clothes are handed out, while food is driven to flooded neighborhoods.
You got silverware at home? Okay.
Preliminary numbers were approximately 60,000 claims were made in the greater Houston area for Red Cross assistance of some type or another.
Firefighters are using boats to rescue people in the streets. Residents with small boats also help out. At around 2 p.m., the Coast Guard receives another urgent call. A woman reports that water is pouring into her brother's home near Greens Bayou in the northeast part of the city. Her brother is a 30-year-old quadriplegic who breathes with a ventilator. His house is losing power from the flooding. Without electricity, he won't survive.
So it was pretty urgent that we get to him and get him to a hospital so he could be on the proper ventilator as soon as possible.
By the time they reach the quadriplegic's home, the waters outside the house are 5 feet high. Next on Atmospheres, the battle to save Houston.
I had to come up with him and breathe for him because we couldn't stop breathing for him once he came off the respirator.
I want babies in this boat now!
I pulled around to the back of the National Guard truck and I hollered, "I want the babies! I want the babies now!"
It's Saturday afternoon in Houston, and the deluge from remnants of Tropical Storm Allison has finally stopped. But the damage is already done. Over 20 inches of rain has fallen in just 12 hours. Entire neighborhoods are buried in up to 5 feet of water. Thousands of people have been displaced. A Coast Guard chopper flies over one of the most flooded parts of the city, Greens Bayou. They are searching for a 30-year-old quadriplegic male whose house is filling with water, causing the power to go in and out.
With the water rising and the patient being on a ventilator, obviously needing electricity, we had some serious concerns about this patient's welfare.
Pilot Don Winfield and rescue swimmer Chris Monville know they're in the right neighborhood, but they're having trouble finding the right house.
In an urban setting like that, you know, there's a lot more obstacles to deal with.
You've got a lot of trees in the vicinity, and we also had power lines that we had to deal with.
Even more confusing are the large numbers of people waving for help.
And so the biggest problem we had was to figure out who was really in need and who was just hanging out in their house.
They finally locate what they hope is the right block. Chris is lowered into 4 feet of floodwater. A neighbor points him in the right direction. He wades into the quadriplegic's house.
I found the gentleman laying in his bed on an electrically powered ventilator, and his room was set up, you know, like a hospital. We have what we call a bag valve mask. We just basically squeeze the bag and pump oxygen to somebody manually, and that's what we had to do once we took him off the ventilator.
The man is moved outside via a large rescue basket known as a litter. Neighbors lend a fishing boat to float the patient toward the hovering helicopter. The helicopter can hoist about 600 pounds. That limit is about to be tested.
The combination of the rescue swimmer, the litter, and the patient probably came to right around 550 pounds.
I had to come up with him and breathe for him because we couldn't stop breathing for him once he came off the respirator.
While Chris dangles off the side of the litter, the pair is slowly lifted to the chopper. Chris never leaves the man's side, continually pumping air into his lungs.
You know, he looked at me and I looked at him. He couldn't tell me how he's feeling or anything, but I think that he understood that we were doing the best we could do for him and that we were taking him out of that situation and taking him somewhere better.
The helicopter flies the patient to an ambulance, which quickly drives him to a nearby hospital. Acts of heroism are the norm in Houston that weekend. On Sunday morning, resident Bruce Reisner cruises the swollen bayous in his flat-bottom boat, looking for people in need of help. At around 9 a.m., he spots a National Guard truck sinking in 10 feet of water. Several people are trapped in the back.
I pulled around to the back of the National Guard truck and I hollered, "I want the babies! I want the babies now!"
I want babies in this boat now!
Bruce loads the children into his boat, then the adults. He shuttles them all to safety. Bruce will spend 28 straight hours away from home. During that time, he'll help save about 500 people. By late Sunday afternoon, much of the water has receded. Over the next few days, homeowners who had been forced to evacuate begin to trickle back and assess the damage. Johnny and Jane Perry had fled their home near Greens Bayou for just 24 hours with their dogs and cat. In that short time, floodwaters almost totally destroyed their belongings.
All the furniture is completely toppled. Items floated from one room into another room.
All of our belongings, all of our clothes, all the furniture that we had thought, you know, would last us a lifetime.
Everything is gone. The damage exceeds $100,000. Only one prized possession is unharmed, a quilt made 90 years ago by Jane's grandmother.
The quilt was still on the bed. It was completely dry. The mattress had floated up to the ceiling, and the water stopped about 1.5 feet before the ceiling, and the quilt was dry and fine.
Just 5 miles away, 57-year-old Jody Walter returns to his house for the first time that Tuesday.
I just didn't really know what to expect. We had to pry open the door to get in. Just hard to describe. It's to see everything that you have just totally destroyed.
my daughter's picture from a wedding 2 weeks ago. Just a chair in the ceiling.
The damage totals around $200,000. But the Walters are determined to rebuild.
This is our home. It's where we raised our family. It's where we grew up. And it's just hard to pack up or just to leave.
By the end of the week, Houston's streets and highways are once again filled with traffic. But life is far from normal. More than 45,000 homes and businesses have been flooded. Basement parking lots are filled with water and must be pumped dry. The 33-year-old Alley Theater has incurred more than $6 million in damage. The flood is Houston's worst natural disaster in recent memory. Allison caused more than $5 billion in damage in the greater Houston area. In a 36-hour period, the Coast Guard performed 220 rescues. The grateful include 15-year-old Monique Shepard, who gave birth to a girl after being pulled from her flooded home. Once safe in the hospital, Monique named her daughter after the storm.
First name is Latier, and her middle name is Allison.
2.5 months later, the man who helped rescue Monique, Chris Monville, is among the flood heroes honored at a Coast Guard award ceremony.
You get a hug.
There, he saw baby Latier Allison for the first time.
We very rarely get to see the people that we rescue afterwards, so when the whole crew was there, and Monique and her parents and her daughter Latier, it felt good knowing that we took part in getting her safely to the hospital.
But not everyone made it out of Allison's grasp. 22 people lost their lives, including 21-year-old Chad Guerin. His friends, Jeremy and Mark, will never forget how much he meant to them. They also won't soon forget the unexpected force of Allison.
I think it just shows us there are powers out there beyond our control, and that things don't always work out the way they're supposed to be.
I never did think that a flood would be that dangerous, but it really gives me perspective on just the power of nature, seeing something like this sweep in and then be gone so quickly as well.
Allison's destruction didn't end in Houston. The storm then dropped more than 2 feet of rain in Louisiana, moved up the East Coast, dumping rain all the way to Maine and causing flooding in North Carolina and the suburbs of Philadelphia. Allison is the costliest tropical storm in U.S. history. But even more amazing, almost all the damage occurred after the storm was downgraded below tropical storm strength. Thanks for joining us for Atmospheres. I'm Jim Cantore.